Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier. And let me say from the outset, don't be surprised by a surprise question. Sorry, but I had to get that in. But to be fair, these surprise questions are frequent visitors to history source papers. Now for this presentation, as you can see, I'm looking at an example of a single source question. Pause and give yourself the time to read the question and the source, and to think about how you might respond, and then listen to what I have to say. That way, I think you'll get the most out of my presentation. Now, the first thing to say, and probably the most important thing, is that in a single source surprise question, the heart of your answer has to be in the provenance of the source. You may link things from the source to the provenance. You may link its purpose and its audience to the provenance, but it still comes back to the provenance. The mark scheme for this question only gives half marks for answers that only explain surprise or not by using the source itself. And look at the examiner's comments. The best answers rested on an understanding that the authorship of the source matters as much as what the source says. And let me add a learning point here. You may well not know what is meant by a note. The source is a note made by Robert Lansing. In diplomacy, these are usually quite formal things, something for the record, to be read and may be used by the foreign minister and his department, though in this case it would be the American delegation, and so would most likely include President Wilson. And so something else to say about source questions. Sometimes it's absolutely okay to raise a possibility in source questions. You're sitting in an exam hall and you're not told everything about a source. It has to be a reasonable suggestion, but this kind of thing shows you're really thinking about the source. In this question, we don't know the audience of the source for sure, but we can make an educated guess. Just keep explaining your reasoning. The other thing to say about the provenance of a source is that if you are given extra information, there simply must be a reason. Again, look at the examiner's comments. Candidates are told that Lansing was replaced by House as his, that is President Wilson's, chief advisor. A small number of candidates used this information to explain that they were not surprised by Source D because of his criticism of House. Only a small number when they were given the information. The other thing to say is always use your own knowledge too. Place the source and your explanations in a wider context. Again, I turn to the examiner's comments. Other candidates focused on House and his position as Wilson's chief advisor. They explained their surprise at House's actions in Source D because of Wilson's belief in the League of Nations. And you could make use of the source here because Lansing says House was willing to destroy the League. Staying with the source, you can use your own knowledge to explain why you weren't surprised when the source suggested France preferred an alliance with America and Britain to a League of Nations with no teeth. You know that France wanted and got an Anglo-American guarantee. even though it wasn't honoured when America didn't ratify the treaty. And you know France wanted the League to have its own army. So don't ignore the source, nor your own knowledge, but pay at least as much attention to its provenance. And let me add, the same thing would apply to the messages in a cartoon. But let's be clear about the key points that should have been made in a top answer. You would be surprised by House's proposal, but not by Lansing's criticism of it, given the League was the centrepiece of President Wilson's post-war order. But you would be surprised that Wilson sacked Lansing and replaced him with House, because Lansing was supporting the League and House was not. And I'll end by going back to the question, are you surprised by this source? Explain your answer using details of the source and your own knowledge. You may think, come on, I don't need to be told this. Well, some students do, because the examiner's report says that weaker answers often selected something that was or was not surprising, but neglected to produce a satisfactory explanation. And then adds, while others produce perfectly good reasons for being surprised or not surprised, but did not state whether they were actually surprised or not. In questions like this, it is crucial that candidates clearly state whether they are surprised or not. That's all from the Chief Examiner. Please take note. Read the questions carefully and answer them accordingly. You need a concluding assessment, and I think it's best to adopt a how far to what extent approach. And every single question will ask you to explain yourself, to use the sources, and all except the last question, your own knowledge too. So, what would a strong answer look like? Something like this, I think. Lansing's note was essentially a criticism of House and his willingness to compromise with the French, to the point where Lansing believes House was willing to destroy the League. Now, whilst I'm not surprised by Lansing's criticism of House's proposal, given the League was the centrepiece of President Wilson's post-war order, but for the same reason, I'm surprised House is suggesting any move that is likely to undermine the League, and I'm even more surprised that, as we are told, Wilson sacked Lansing and replaced him with House. The note also tells us something about the French position, and I'm not surprised when the source suggests France preferred an alliance with America and Britain to a League of Nations with no teeth, as I am aware that France wanted and got, though it wasn't honoured when America didn't ratify the treaty, an Anglo-American guarantee, and that France wanted the League to have its own army. But to go back to Lansing's purpose for writing the note, he might well have been trying to discredit House, who it appears was a rival. Again, we are told he took over from Lansing, and Lansing might well have expected President Wilson to read his note. And so, given its possible purpose and its ultimate audience, on the whole, I'm not surprised by the source. But I am surprised by House because of Wilson's belief in the League of Nations. So, I hope you won't be surprised by the surprise question. And by the way, notice that I'm comfortable using the personal pronoun I. Why not? The question is asking what I think. Now I'm saying this throughout this series on past treaty source questions. I have 18 past papers on the Treaty of Versailles and the Paris Peace Conference as a whole, plus their mark schemes, plus the examiners' reports. The more you practice past source questions, the better you will be in that exam hall, and it's the kind of thing we can work with in tutorials. If you've been listening to my videos, you know the drill. Get your parents to contact me at historymadeeasier@gmail.com and we'll see if we can sort something out. But for now, let me thank you for listening and wish you the very best of luck in your studies. Cheers.